Nebraska, which is near Hastings, Nebraska. I'm a city person. All I ever wanted to do was grow up and marry a farmer, and I just happened to join the military. So we spent 25 years in a military career. The nice thing about that is economically, I got to see farming from all over the country and how everything is done a little bit differently. So if I tell you, I can tell you easily how the sale of your oats goes down in Texas, how it's used and why it is sold the way it is. Just don't ask me when to plant it here in Nebraska. That's my farming experience. I own 40 acres. My husband spoils me. He works in town to pay for my farming hobby, and that is goats. In the middle of our 40-acre property is a lake, and I didn't want to dump it. Everything drains down into this lake, and I didn't want to dump a lot of chemicals in there. So some Texas friends said, what you need is goats. So I went and got goats. I pulled the first ones off the trailer. We gave them shots with the gave them right, grabbed them by the horn, drug them to the pasture, let them go, looked at each other and said, oh, we're never doing cattle again. That's just too easy. That was way back in 2011. He retired from the Army in 2015. In 2019, he came home from a local community breakfast, and he said that there's an old-timer who wanted to send a letter into the editor regarding the local zoning regulations that would ban offenses. And the old man was afraid of having his name on the letter to the editor. So my husband said, let me take it home to my wife. I looked at it and thought it was nuts. There's no way. So if you don't know, Lyon County, Kansas is Flint Hills. We grow rocks and fat cows. Nothing else. This is cowboy country. You don't have to go to Texas to see cowboys. You'll see them in the Flint Hills. So there's no way that they would ban barbed wire fences in the Flint Hills, right? So I ignored it. And then a chain email went around. It said you had like 3 days left to comment before the commissioners voted to adopt these regulations. So for the first time, I opened up those regulations and I didn't sleep for 3 days. Do we move or do we fight? And I got to thinking now, looking back, that, we picked the one place that we really were involved, and we got to going. What we discovered is that HUD, as in Housing and Urban Development, came in and petitioned our county and said, hey, you know what? We'll give you a bunch of grant money. All you got to do is rewrite your zoning regulations, update your comprehensive plan. That comprehensive plan turned all of private property into public property. They literally zoned everything outside of the city of Emporia as a park. That's what their language was. The regulations are needed to implement the comprehensive plan. Everybody thought I was nuts, I was crazy, this couldn't be. Everybody but Protect the Harvest. I called them up and said, you're dealing with the land grab, they said. That's what they told me. For what? Next door was Chase County, which was Tall Grass National Prairie, federal land. That's about 40 minutes. My closest military base was an hour and a half. You have an Air Force base in Wichita. Fort Riley, Kansas, of course, is an Army base. An hour and a half. For what, I thought. The more we got into it, we discovered that we are in a regional council. So planning commission, think of your zoning board and your zoning commission. Okay, well, in Kansas, every county, if they want to, can join a planning or regional council. Ours was located on Fort Riley, Kansas. It was called Flint Hills Regional Council. And they invited this expansion into our neck of the woods. I discovered our county is not the only county that is dealing with this. In fact, today I took phone calls from a couple of other counties in Kansas that are dealing with what Lyon County ended up dealing with. Then I discovered that this is going on in other states. This is not a new program. It has been here and incorporated and started getting knocked on doors in about 2008. 2013 and 14, it got really hardcore. The point being is the infrastructure for 30 by 30 is already there. It's there. It's grounded. The minute your county commissioner is elected, They're in that office, they're taught and they're trained about and manipulated, I would say, lied to. I was so mad at my county commissioners, thinking how on earth could they invite this into our county. I now know, having gone to several counties in 3 different states now, that they were the first victims. They're the first ones lied to and manipulated into these programs. So what happened to us was they introduced zoning regulations that turned private property into public property, basically. We fought that back. We discovered the authors of our zoning regulations were called Urban Collaborative out of Portland, Oregon, invited by the regional council. The author of our regulations, named Zoe Anton, has a company on the side called Craft Crickets. And their website showed that they believed that animals, livestock in particular, were ruining the earth, and the protein of the future was going to be crickets.
Oh, jeez.
Now, when I walked around my neighborhood and I said, hey, you know what, they're trying to ban barbed wire fences in Lyon County, 2 things always happen. First thing is they look behind them to check and see if they can see a barbed wire fence. And the second thing is they give you the stare of the deer in the headlights look. And I'm kidding, not kidding. If they had tinfoil in their back pocket, they would have handed it to me. Said, here, ma'am, make a hat. And that's how, there's no way. I mean, the first initial reaction is there's no way this would happen to us. This is too crazy. So time goes on, and a representative named Tatum Lee, she's a representative in Kansas, called me up, and she said, Angel, do you have a national heritage area over you? I said, no, I don't know. She said, well, this is what happens when national heritage areas go in. They come in with regulations that tend to push people into meeting federal land management plans. And of course, I'm paraphrasing here. Tatum could do a better job of explaining that completely. I said, no, I don't think so. She says, well, let me put you in touch with people. Come to find out, my county was trying to join a national heritage area about the time they were trying to pass these regulations, all for money, federal grant dollars. So we started fighting back on national heritage areas, and we discovered that there was one trying to go in northern Kansas and southern Nebraska, called the Kansas-Nebraska Heritage Area Partnership. That involved 49 counties. We started doing public meetings and informing the public, and by the end of this time, this year, by now, we have 45 counties out of 49 that have passed resolutions against joining that NHA. We accidentally informed Freedom's Frontier National Heritage Area. This is a national heritage area that's been in Kansas and Missouri. So eastern Kansas, western Missouri. That's been there since 2006. We accidentally informed those folks that they're in a national heritage area. And my phone started ringing off the hook. The first call was, does this have anything to do with the zoning regulations that my county is now implementing? And the second question is why didn't I know? So they do that, just like these windmills, they do that on purpose. The first people that they pitch this to is your county commissioners. In the counties that I went to, that I have presented to in front of commissioners, the thing that I learned is that the first people that are financially invested in the wind farms are usually county commissioners. That's the first, if they can get one county commissioner and offer him a deal he cannot refuse, he'd be stupid to refuse, then they get their foot in the door, and then from there they can petition those neighbors to join in on the group. Now that's not always the case with every county. For right now, I'm hearing about a windmill farm that's trying to go in Osage County, and they're going to hook up to the windmill farm that's in my county. So they're hitting those landowners up first that are closest to that windmill farm. And I don't know that any of them are actually commissioners. So that's not always the case. But I do know that they go to the county commissioners first. They try, if they can pitch it to them and get them on board, it doesn't matter what you all think. I've seen this rip apart counties. I came in after the fact to get a resolution on the Freedom's Frontier and 30 by 30 to Neosho County, Kansas. Neosho County, Kansas had 2 commissioners resign over windmill farms. They're not popular wherever they go, and they're still being implemented in. Senator Mike Thompson in Kansas, he's in the electric and utilities chair. He's tried to introduce legislation because what they have in Kansas is a direct line from the federal government to buy off those county commissioners. So he tried to introduce legislation that puts the people in there, or puts the state legislature in there. And so far it has not been successful, and this is spreading on. In Kansas, according to Mike Thompson, he said there are 4,500 windmill towers in Kansas, and by 2024 they have another 6,500 scheduled to go in. So what does this have to do with 30 by 30, right? 30 by 30 is an old scheme. It comes out of Buffalo Commons. Buffalo Commons is in a paper that was written in a college in the 1960s that said everything between the two mountain ranges needed to be returned to the buffalo. There was a desert, it didn't produce nothing. The people here were leaving, the population was getting smaller. It needs to be returned to buffalo and a park, and that was called the Buffalo Commons. Now from that era, got back to nature, we have the RV and the tent and the expanded parks and hunting and fishing. So that was that whole cultural era from that time. And then in about that area, that time, the eminent domain was being used by the National Park Service a lot. And about the end of the Vietnam War, people were coming home, turning on TVs, and they were seeing little old ladies and little old men being drugged out of their houses so that their area could be turned into a national park. This was common, especially along the major rivers, the Mississippi River, Missouri River, through Arkansas, that territory. Reagan came in, right? Because the Sagebrush Rebellion was a response to that eminent domain. They had a big inventory list that was created in the 1960s to grab up all of this land. And the Sagebrush Rebellion resulted, I'm cutting out a lot of history here, guys. I'm getting really short, forgive me. Reagan came in and promised that, that he was on the side of the sagebrush folks and the landowners and the property folks. So that kind of calmed down the federal government a tad little bit. What it did was take eminent domain off the table, and they just pushed everything under the rug. And it's all backdoor. So what a national heritage area is it is a federal jurisdiction voted on by Congress. I don't have to explain to you what a federal jurisdiction is and everything that it brings, right? That comes with a federal land management plan that has to be adopted in 3 years within that designation. Now that board is in private hands. So now there's legislation on the table that puts that directly under the Department of Interior. Now everybody in the National Heritage Area under the Department of Interior is getting really excited because the first time in history they have an administration that has confessed to the coveting of our federal government and of private lands. So now they are calling for making National Heritage Areas National Park Service units. What a unit is a national park. That is Yellowstone. So that's just one aspect of all of that coveting of land that's growing. So what does that have to do with windmills? That comes back to that infrastructure of the economic development. If you don't have a planning commission or a regional council over you, you probably have an economic development district. And this is your direct line from the federal government to your county commissions. All of this stuff has been introduced to your county through economic development in one way, form, or another. If you get a hold of those economic development plans, whether they are local, whether they're regional, or whether they're national, what you'll discover, and I've actually brought a couple of them with me if you'd like to see them, what you'll discover is they actually say things like, industry is bad. See, industry pays high wages, and y'all get comfortable. And then when that manufacturing plant closes, y'all go broke, and you get a Flint, Michigan type scenario. So the best thing to do is to just not have industry at all, because then you don't have the extreme economy, right? Then they say that agriculture is bad, it's ruining the environment, livestock are awful, y'all are polluting the ground, so we need to get away from agriculture. And we need to change this area between the two Rocky Mountains, the original Buffalo Commons. We need to change this to tourism and energy production. Energy production isn't just windmills, it's also solar farms, green energy that they call. So with this plan comes all of the National Heritage Area jurisdictions whose office is on Fort Riley, who happens to want to be expanding a drone training area through the region that happens to just be in that National Heritage Area. Sure, it's all a coincidence. That also comes with the windmill farm expansions and the solar farm expansions, also Rails for Trails. It's part of that program. All of this combines together. Most of it, like Rails for Trails in particular, is funded under the Department of Transportation. It's assigned to your state Department of Transportation, and it is put in, the money's there, it's earmarked, set aside for the purpose of trails. They get a lot of private funding from Weiss, Soros, and a lot of environmental groups that go into these trails. In our comprehensive plan that talked about the public use of private land, it had an extensive trail system that would tie into the rail trails. That rail trail tied into the rail trail that came all the way up through Omaha, up through Sioux City, along the Missouri River. Extensive. The actual legislation that funds it, voted on by Congress, was called MAP, M-A-P 21. Is the acronym for it. Now I do believe it's called Safe Passages for Schools. The funding is there for building it. It is not there for maintaining it. In Topeka, the rail trail is the favorite place for the homeless camps. In Emporia, the rail trail, most of it has been washed out. But your county probably has a committee or a commission that's set aside specifically for trails implementations. It's not necessarily, not every county does, but I know they're at least getting solicited for it, to form a committee to put in trails, because we're all too fat and we need more exercise. Okay. There are a few things that you can do. When I went to the 30 by 30 summit in Lincoln, Nebraska, I discovered something, a plan that they're using, and that is to use the NEPA regulations. When we fought these NHAs, we presented those NEPA regulations for NHAs to the county commissioners. So what NEPA is the National Environmental Policy Act. Whenever the government does anything, whether it's to expand a road, put in a park, anything, they are to follow the NEPA Policy Act. That means that they are to do environmental impact studies. Does this affect the viewshed of a historical area? Are there any Indian arrowheads under there? Is this a Civil War battleground? Is this part of, everything? What does it do to the wildlife? How many endangered species does this affect? You have the right to ask of that windmill company the NEPA regulations. Where are those impact studies? It's required by federal law. Nobody's thought about it. When we sat there in that meeting and we listened to them talk about it, we were like, yeah, why haven't we done that? Why haven't we done that with the NHAs? Why haven't we done that with the trails? It can be done. You as a member of the public can do that. You can ask your zoning board members to do that. To require, not that the zoning board members will do the impact studies, but they will have the companies that are bringing these in, they will ask for their impact studies and say, we're going to put this on hold until we provide them or get them, and go from there. So that is an avenue that's a lot more cost effective and probably a lot more focused. I mean, I've seen these guys rip apart counties. They don't care if those commissioners resign. You can beg and you can plead with your county commissioners. There's a good chance they're not going to listen to you, even if it means it costs them their election. By the time that fight starts, pride is already set in, and they're ground in, or they're scared that they're going to get sued, or that they're going to lose funding. All they need is the majority. And they usually have one in the bag before they even come into your county. So before I introduce the next speaker, who has a lot more technical knowledge on this than I do y'all have any questions for me?
So how long can we tie them up with this NEPA?
That depends. That depends. How long does NEPA tie up any other organization?
It's private industry, it's decades almost.
Yeah, sometimes 3 to 7 to 10 years. You can at least tie them up till you get a new administration, new commissioners who are not financially tied to it or not sold. So the biggest thing that I need to tell people is that this is not your fault. You know how we hear that we're not going to commissioners' meeting, that we're not paying enough attention. This is deliberate. What they did to us in our county with the comprehensive planning and zoning regulations is they put a little blurb in the small part of the newspaper, and they set that meeting up for 10:30 in the morning when they knew you would be at work. And then they invited your friends or their friends. They invited their friends to come so that they can then go back and say, oh yeah, the public supported. We interviewed this many people, not saying that it's all their friends. When we got the Freedom of Information request from the NHAs, we discovered that they had been soliciting our state and federal legislatures for 5 years before anybody even knew. They don't even have their nonprofit status yet. And they have been soliciting and lobbying those state and federal representatives for 5 years. They said even in their many meeting minutes, they were asked, do we need to start getting the public informed? And they said, no, not until the feasibility study makes it a requirement. They have no intentions of telling the people. So don't beat yourself up. They slid this under the table on purpose. And they only did it when they already had your commissioner snowed.
Is there a disclosure that we know who's on the take for the commissioner? Someplace, is there a place to dig that
That
up?
depends on state law, so that it varies from state to state. I don't know that because a lot of your guys own land and own their own businesses, I don't know that their personal finances is relevant to that, especially if they didn't get campaign contributions. So I don't know that there is a way to do that. Well, on the NHAs, I had a county commissioner call me up and say, you know, they're threatening me, and he never specified who they were. He just said, I am getting threatened. Not only are they saying I will never get elected to an office, they're telling me that unless I persuade the other commissioners to go along with this, that I will never be allowed back in my town without holding my head in shame. I mean, they threatened to do a smear campaign. So on a county level, these are not state reps that are on TV, you know. These guys don't usually get the mailers in the mail talking bad about them. They're not used to that kind of a threat. So it isn't that hard, especially when the minute they get into office, the first lessons on how to be a commissioner, it's setting that framework. That infrastructure is already there. The framework is already there to convince them, also subtly, how little power, you know, you don't have that much power. No, you need us. You can't do this. See, you gotta get bridges, and so in order to get the bridges, the fear that I hear from commissioners, that's the number one fear. Well, if we pass a resolution, does this mean we won't get any money for roads? Oh my gosh, we're in the middle of a bridge update. Does this mean that'll go down the tank? Oh my gosh, our school is getting maintenance done. What happens with that? Oh my gosh, our hospital's struggling. What are we gonna do if we pass this? So by the time it comes down to it, they've already been convinced that whatever they do is tied solely to the federal dollars that come in. The good news is that after all of these resolutions have been passed in these states, not one threat has ever materialized. Not one fear has ever materialized. It's not worth it. Any other questions?
Well, I have to agree with you on several points. The Cherry County, Nebraska, they had at least 2 commissioners, at least one that had already signed up to be in the wind farm deal, and they kind of really controlled the whole meeting. Now, they've since not had, I guess, updated that they didn't get the wind farm, but you could tell by the whole setting of the meeting, how the meeting went, that anytime you said anything, the one commissioner just squashed it. The other thing that I guess I bring up a little bit is, they have these threats on the money, and I know how they work with wind farms, and now I see how they're working with the carbon dioxide pipeline, because a neighbor called me just about last week. He said, "Hey, what'd you do about the carbon dioxide pipeline?" I said, "Nothing." He said, "Well, they were here today, and to cross one corner of my piece of property, they offered me $88,000. Well, see, they put enough money out there to one, the next one says, well, maybe I'll find out what the heck I get. I really do believe that, and I see the wind farm doing the same thing.
Yes, that's exactly right. They offer them a deal they can't refuse, and then once you get that foot in the door, the rest of the dominoes tend to fall behind. Yes, that's exactly how they do that. The more interesting thing is on 30 by 30, we're noticing a push in different locations. So, for example, in the Kansas, Nebraska heritage area, southern Nebraska heritage area, we kept getting notices from people that their CRP contracts would not have an end date on them. And we were told that if they slid that contract back across the table and pushed for it, they could get an end date. But we do know several people that walked away completely and totally because there was no end date on them. The other was fine print on endangered species. So the last USDA email that I saw regarding this issue was bragging that they made a wildlife corridor in western Nebraska, western Kansas, and eastern Colorado, that they have so much CRP land that it's okay to go ahead and release the elk that they have been rehabilitating on Fort Riley. At the same time, I'm starting to see a lot of language on wolves. Did you know that we had wolves, at least in Kansas apparently? And all of a sudden I'm seeing articles in the nature magazines and the wildlife magazines about the close relationship between Native Americans and wolves and how they were domesticated and everything else. And so there's a lot of talk about reintroducing wolves back into this part of the country. There is one of the more frustrating things, and I forgive me for putting legislators on the spot, but one of the more frustrating things that I get from legislatures is, we'll keep an eye on it, we'll watch out for it. Guess what? Infrastructure's already there, and while you're watching out for it, it's being implemented. It's already going in. In the southeast Kansas area, it's all about water and endangered species. They're coming down hard on those folks down there. They get a lot more rain. You're getting closer to the Ozarks and the Missouri River and that type of area. So wherever they can harass you, they are. They're pushing forever conservation easements big time. And this is through private companies. And I want to point out that in Chase County, Kansas, the Tallgrass National Prairie, only 30-some acres is owned by the federal government. The rest, more than 10,000 acres, is owned by the Nature Conservancy. But all of it is a federal National Park Service unit. It's a national park. And they're buying up conservation easements all around military bases and current national parks with the sole purpose of expansion. Once they get the right president and the right Congress through, they'll simply declare it another park unit. So, Historical Preservation Act, Antiquities Act, all of that is in play. You have a federal department that's very, very excited about the idea of 30 by 30. So it's already there. When I was in Kansas, I had a letter slipped to me. This is a letter that your representatives get called to, including the ones here in Nebraska. They get called to. So your representative gets called to go do training on issues that might be coming up in industries in the next couple of years. That way they're aware and they know about it, right? This one was asking them to pledge to implement 30 by 30 when they come back to the state. your Nebraska representatives assigned to that would be asked to do that. I raised a big fit. I sent it to some people, and they got it in the right hands. And as far as I know, it was squashed. But you never know, because you, the public, are not invited to these meetings. You don't know what they've been pledged, what they've agreed to do, and what they've been sold at these types of meetings. So, go ahead.
Can you speak to the extent of the county's liability if they tell this windmill company to get out of our county?
I am hearing rumors that there is one county, I do believe, in Kansas that is being sued. They are being sued to try to bully and force them into it. They're not going to win that lawsuit, but how much money does a county have, and how many hours can a county attorney spend on defending themselves, right? So my best advice would be to go for those NEPA, the Policy Act, and use that, because that's cheaper than having to defend yourself in court and easier than being bullied. They can't do that in every county. They possibly can't do that. But they are going to target the areas where they already have windmills, because it's cheaper to tie in to those windmills than it is to start anew somewhere else. Remember, this whole area is to be energy production. Now, none of this makes sense, right? Because how are you going to get tourism? Who's going to want to come to Nebraska to see windmills in Buffalo? Come on, right? You can't figure that out. They're going to walk these trails that's maintained by nobody, because the money's there to build them, but there ain't no money to maintain them. You know, to see buffalo and windmills? Are they not thinking this through? So one of my favorite representatives in Kansas asked me to attend a meeting for the U.S. Global Leadership Alliance. And I went as her property rights advisor. This is a scary meeting. President Biden spoke at this meeting. This is where Pfizer and Bill Gates and all those guys come together. And there's a couple of things that I noticed in this meeting. One is they said, thank you, United States of America, for all of the donations of vaccines you have sent to African countries. You know, the leaders of those African countries said their countries are 97% vaccinated. And I got to thinking, I don't remember any Willie Nelson concerts raising money for that. Right? Okay. All right. The second is, this was an infomercial for money for Africa. The United States needs to invest in money right now into Africa, because China is. And see, that's going to be the future of our food production. We're going to import all of our food. And if we don't get ahead of China, then that food's going to go to China. And then Americans will have to ruin their land to feed their people. So it's important to invest in African countries now in order to secure food for the world. And then it all started to make sense. The cricket farming, Bill Gates' fake meat, right? If you listen to his speeches, he talks about how we're going to improve genetics on livestock in Africa, but we need to go to synthetic meats here. Well, that improvement in genetics is so that they can have their steak, right? And we can grow our own food on our countertop, living in our apartment in some city somewhere. But the most amazing thing about that is they're not talking to each other, because I did an interview with Diane Sayre of the Schiller Institute, and she's running against Chuck Schumer in New York. And in New York City, they believe that they're going to run out of food, that the population of the world is so big that we're literally starving ourselves out. And I found myself having to explain that the amount of farmland that we actually have in this country, if you deduct cities, forests, CRP, parks, everything, is probably at any given time in production, maybe only 15%. And yet we could probably, if we were allowed to, if we were not burning it up in fuel for ethanol, we could probably feed the whole entire world if we were allowed to, just on that 15%. They were shocked. They had no clue. So in the city, they're already doing a stranglehold there on food and infrastructure and plumbing and electricity and all of that. And here I am thinking that they just want to move us into the city. For what? If they're strangleholding them out. So I don't know that if, and it's kind of like goes back to the Fort Riley thing. Well, obviously, coincidentally, I should say that, coincidentally, happens to be wanting to do a drone expansion in the same area that the National Heritage Area is going in. Okay, so I know that the wind farms is part of 30 by 30, right? Because it says so in the economic development plans. Okay? Did you know that it interferes with the radio signals of drones? So why would Fort Riley be expanding on national heritage areas for drones where they're putting in windmills? Right? Is this one hand not talking to the other? And it could be that you have several departments that see an opportunity to grow and are simply taking advantage of that, is what I suspect is going on there. Go ahead.
I just got a basic question. I've listened to everything that's been talked to, and you keep mentioning infrastructure and how all these plans and programs are in place. The question I would have is each individual in here, what is the most basic thing that we could do as a defense against it that's going to be simple and effective?
So immediately on the windmill farms, I would say NEPA. Okay? On your land and property itself is the first thing that I would tell you is that you are not ruining the environment. I actually had this conversation with a farmer in western Kansas who said, you know, we need to cut back on fertilizer because it's killing the soil. Now, if you don't know this, western Kansas is in a drought. It's looking pretty pathetic out there, but it's still green. Underneath there, down the bottom is green. And I pointed to that green and said, where's the dead soil at? This is a farmer that I'm talking to. Where's the dead soil at? Well, you know, they put it on there to increase production and I said, well, what, yeah, well, that's killing the soil. If they pull it back, you know, then they're not going to have near as much production. Which brings me back to why did they put the fertilizer on there to begin with? No, where's the only time I have ever seen dead soil was when we were stationed in Alaska, when the oil literally opened up from the ground, came up, bubbled up, and killed thousands of acres of ground. And amazingly, within 3 years, it sunk back down to the surface. You couldn't even see it, and you had wildlife growing right on top of it again. So the answer to that question is that whatever you can, talk to your state legislatures. Make sure they stay on top of legislation to fight this back. In any way, shape, or form. There's going to be, I can tell you all the ideas that we're introducing in the Kansas legislature, but you should know half of them I stole from Nebraska. So what other things can you do to help protect and safeguard? Can Nebraska pass legislation on these windmill farms, on this carbon pipeline?
Do you know offhand if we have enough legislators in session now that our voice would be heard?
No. That's why I need you. Because don't let my voice be the only voice that's heard. I can guarantee you every state legislature knows exactly who I am. I get phone calls from PACs saying, Angel, why is the National Heritage Area giving me your phone number and telling me that they will help with the Value Them Both amendment if I can calm you down? So my one voice is making a difference. Just one person. If there's more than one of us, we'll have more of a difference. They need our vote. So at county commission level, your sheriff, your state legislature, get involved. And how you get involved is determined by the gifts that God gave you individually. Well, I have a big mouth, and I'm excellent at research. So that's the gift that I'm working on. But I work with people who know technology and get the word out there. And I work with people who are better researchers than I am. And I work with nerds who understand kilowatt hours. I don't. So those every gift can be utilized in this fight. So I would say let God lead you and get involved in whatever way you think that you can help for as long as you can.
I would say this to everybody in this room, that Senator Brewer and Senator Howard have been integral into what has happened so far in the state of Nebraska. So if you would have any questions, can and put them directly to those two individuals.
So let me say that on microphone so anybody watching can hear. So Senator Brewer
Senator Brewer
and
Senator
Senator,
Halloran have been integral in the things that have been developed in Nebraska in the last
so
year.
Senator Brewer and Senator Halloran have been integral in this,
Including our state representative here as well.
and state representative for Cedar County,
You have District 40.
District 40, have been very helpful in this fight.
Very proactive to the Convention of States movement. Yes.
Convention of States, yes. So Convention of States is a way, that is one of the things that I do say regarding that federal jurisdiction. So whether it's a trail, whether it's a national heritage area, Convention of States is absolutely essential. The only way you can permanently bring these guys back is with an amendment to the Constitution. Absolutely. That's definitely a long-term goal.
I'm the chair of Cedar County GOP, and I actually have a copy of the letter that our commissioners sent to, as a resolution from our county rejecting the 30-30 resolution. And I know that every county in Nebraska has done that.
I think all but like 4 or 5 or maybe, yeah.
Madison County has not.
Yeah.
Well, this week there was something on Greeley County said they were the last one to submit their 30-30 resolution.
Gosh, I hope so. That might be, I think the last map. So if you want to see the map of all the counties that have passed resolutions, American Stewards for Liberty, if you put that on there, you can pull that up and it'll show you all the counties that we all send them copies. They make a nice little map for us that we use all the time. So I think the last time I looked at it, there was 1 or 2 spots. I think Lincoln, Seward County is one of them that hasn't
What was
passed.
the name of it?
American Stewards for Liberty,
Lancaster's Lincoln.
Lancaster County, okay.
And what about York?
York County, I think York County's passed one. I don't know. You'd
Did
have to, I think most of Nebraska has. So
about
what
the
I say
NHA?
about resolutions that your county that your county, and the reason I ask the counties to pass these is because at a very, very minimum, they are eyewitness testimony in court of law. So when I look at those regulations, right, that the county was trying to force on us, it kind of, the technical term that they're trying to move the whole country to is called form-based zoning. So that's very, form-based zoning is what it's called. So it's very wishy-washy language that allows the zoning administrator to interpret those regulations any way that he wants. So when you read the regulations, it sounds like it's really not that threatening. Until a very smart person said to me, you know what, I want you to imagine yourself in front of the judge in a courtroom and say, Your Honor, it says right here in these regulations. When you do that, it's a whole nother perspective. It's the same way with those resolutions. That is a very powerful eyewitness testimony on behalf of any landowner in a court of law, should it come to that. All right, any other questions before I turn it over to the expert? All right, I have a little grandson here. He's dying to ask his grandma a question.
Alright, I actually have 2 things. For one, I've noticed that whenever the last
You know
few,
Mama's going to kill me, right?
yeah, but the last few years, I've noticed that there's been fewer cattle. I've noticed fewer cattle.
So the reason my little grandson here is he's the reason why my husband drains his bank account. It's not the only reason. I actually have 6 of them. But he was diagnosed as a type 1 diabetic at 7 years old. So, Aiden, let me ask you, and I want you to hold up your hand and show folks.
Yeah.
When you eat meat, how much insulin do you have to take?
0.
0. I took the banning of barbed wire fences as a direct attack on the livestock industry, which is a direct attack on the health of my grandson. That child is going to bury me. I will not bury him. He will eat healthy. And to make sure that Mama allows you to attend these, you should.
Honestly, I should shut up, but I also think the thought of eating crickets is absolutely disgusting.
Well, if you didn't hear, eating crickets is absolutely disgusting. So I'm going to turn this over now to the expert on windmills. I am so glad that he's here and then can answer all of the technical questions I have the very good general information and the personal experience. So I'm just not that smart. So, thank you, guys.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
I don't know so much about the expert part after following you. You know, you make this kind of tough, but thank you for the introduction. I'll do what I can. The first thing I need to do is, and I feel it's appropriate at this time, is tell you about Range Magazine. I am obligated to promote this magazine, and there's a story behind that. I copied a couple pictures out of the summer issue. No, I think this is a spring issue of Range Magazine. And then I noticed, and I assumed it was in here, but it says reproduction in whole or part without written permission is strictly prohibited. And it got to bothering me a little bit. And I've read this magazine for probably 10 years or so, and there's some really good articles in here. But anyway, I've read some editorials written by the editor, and I get the idea that this lady lives by the rules, and not necessarily all written rules. And I don't know what color hair she has. If she has red hair or not. So I talked to my wife. I said, here's what I did. I copied some of these pictures. Would you track down the editor of this magazine and find out what jail I got to report to? And she found out that I was using these pictures on my wind turbine presentations, and she said, that's good, that's all right, but didn't want to let an opportunity go to waste, so she offered my wife a deal to present to me. So the deal was that she sent me a box of these magazines, and I passed them all out except for about 2 of them, and I brought them along. And she sent me another box of the summer issue. Look at this girl and her little puppy. There's a whole box of them over there. But the deal is, she printed me up a discount coupon, 40% off on the subscription. And there's a little code under where you sign your name here and address NEGN. That's Nebraska Ginger Nelson. Ginger's my wife. So if you use this blue coupon, there's a stack of them over there. Pick up a magazine out of the box. There's probably not a coupon in it if it's in the box. Grab a coupon, and CJ is the editor of this magazine, and she told me if we get 4% subscriptions out of a box of free magazines, that's doing pretty good. And I said, we're going to beat that.
Yeah. What's the code again?
Well, the code is NEGN, and it's just a little deal here written where you sign your name for your address.
Okay.
But if you use one of these, it's on there. But if you've got 100 friends, you can copy these. And I'll be fulfilling my obligation. I want to read the purpose here on this magazine as it's written. Range is an award-winning quarterly devoted to the issues that threaten the West, its people, lifestyles, lands, and wildlife. No stranger to controversy, Range is a leading forum for opposing viewpoints in the search for solutions that will halt the depletion of a natural resource, the American cowboy. She's talking about the people that built this country. She's talking about the people that are sitting right out here. And it reminds me of an experience that I had in my life back in the 1980s. As a cattle feeder, times were kind of tough. As a rancher, times were kind of tough. I was using a broker, a cattle order buyer, to keep my yard full, and he
introduced me to a rancher in Wyoming over the phone. And he said, Doug, this guy's got the kind of cattle you like to feed. And he told the guy that Doug's a cattle feeder and, member of the club, so to speak. And he stepped aside. He didn't charge me a commission or anything. This was in the spring or the early summer of the year, and over the phone, we made a verbal deal, no paper contract, signature, anything, on 3 or 4 pot loads of his calves. He said, I'll call you in the middle of September, you bring your trucks. We had the price, the weight, price slide if we needed it. He said, I'll call you, you bring your trucks. So we drove out to western Nebraska one day, stayed overnight, and then the next morning we went down and rode about an hour, and then we turned off the highway. 15 miles of mountain roads, took us 3 hours. And then we got out to the ranch, a nice valley, lots of grass, a corral, a lake, and way off in the distance you could see the cowboys stringing in the cows and calves. And the ladies had the chuck wagon there, and me and the old rancher guy were sitting in the grass leaning on the corral, watching everybody do their job. And I was going to give him a little piece of paper, a check blank, and drive off with his whole year's production. Just me, the 30-some-year-old guy from Nebraska, and him. And we're sitting in the grass talking. And I don't know why I ask this question. Sometimes you open your mouth and a question comes out or something comes out and you say, oh, geez, what the heck? Did I say that? I shouldn't have said that. But I did. It was too late. And I said to him, what happens to a guy that backs out on a cattle deal like this? And he said, I don't know. And then he turned and he looked west. And he pointed at the Rocky Mountains. He says nobody knows what happens to those guys. It just gave me the chills. But I was a part of the club, and I was really proud of it. And I shut up after that. And that was the end of the story. And I drove off with 3 or 4 pot loads of his nice calves that he worked all year long producing. I left him a little piece of paper about that big. Those are the guys this magazine represents. You'll love it. I read it cover to cover. That's the end of that. Thank you. I got started with my wind turbine interest about 12 years ago. I wanted into that business, and I wanted into it bad. I wanted to be the first guy in my area. Harvest the wind. What an intriguing idea. Gotta make money. Not only that, a good friend of mine from high school was promoting them, and he pointed out that I had a farm with a high voltage transmission line going right down the property line. It was on a hill, it was on a ridge, and it was a half mile from the Northeast Nebraska Experiment Farm, and they'd already done the wind research. It's a good spot for wind. Man, we got to talking business. I was going to use this thing to run an irrigation system and pump water. Yeah, I was excited. Naturally so. I wanted to be the first guy in the neighborhood to start this. I was going to be my own developer. I'm going to build one here. If that worked, I'm going over to this corner. I'm going to build another one. Let the irrigation go around. And then I'm going to start in on all the rest of my farms. Wasn't going to be a middleman. I'm just going to be me. Well, what's this stuff cost, you know? And he shot me a price. He was excited too. And I said, Dave, this isn't going to work. I don't need a calculator to figure this out. Just the interest on this money is going to cost more than what I'm paying to buy the electricity. Oh, you don't understand, he said. At that time, 80%, he said, was covered with gifts, grants, subsidies, and net metering. Net metering. Net metering, have you got an idea what that means? That means if I generated power with my wind turbine, I could sell it to the power company if I did not need it. And at this time, net metering was, for the first 10 megawatts, was retail price. They would pay me retail price for my power. I could use it when I needed it, but the rest of it went to the power company. Retail price. So if you buy retail and sell retail, where's your revenue? That's not going to work, because you buy it from me and you take it down the road and sell it to you, the company's not making any money. And then when the power line goes down with the ice storm, and they're out there paying triple overtime to put the thing up at 3 o'clock in the morning, they don't have the revenue to pay the guys to do it. So they go to the bank and borrow the money. And then in the spring, when they have their board meeting, they say, man, that ice storm costs a lot of money. We have to borrow money. We've got to raise the rates. So they send everybody a postcard, including me. Rates went up. Huh. I pick up the phone, call my friend Dave, and say, the rates went up. You want to build me another turbine? See, it's a self-fulfilling cycle here. That's not the only way that turbines will make electric rates and have go up. For instance, here's a chart, and Nick, where you at? There he goes. I'm going to pick on him. Here's a graph. We're going to draw a little base load chart here. A slight variation in the base load. It's the power we use every day of the year that you can bank on. You're going to sell that. And Nick here's got himself a coal plant. And he's running it 24/7. He's selling everything he generates. He's a really good base load guy, and he's selling it cheap. He's efficient, and he's making a reasonable amount of money, and he's selling his power for a very reasonable rate. He's making money, and we're making money. So, there's a law called PURPA, Public Utilities Regulations Act, or something like that, called PURPA, and that says that the utilities must buy so-called renewable energy when it's and if it's available. So I got a windmill, and the windmill's running today. So the power companies switch from buying coal from Nick, come over to me and buy my wind energy. So I'm reducing right here, I'm reducing the base load a little bit. When the wind is blowing, Nick can't sell his power. So, when the wind is not blowing, he's got to make up for this right here. He's got to raise his rates a little bit to make up for what he didn't sell. He burned the coal, he generated the power, he couldn't sell it. So he's either got to raise his rates, go out of business, or cut expenses. That's his only option. Now let me finish this chart here just a little bit, and I'll get back to this point to prove what I'm trying to tell you here. We have a base load power, and then we have peak demand power. And in this area, it usually happens this time of the year. And peak demand goes up when it's hot and the irrigators are pumping and the fans are running and the sprinklers and air conditioners and everything. And it lasts 2 or 3 weeks, and we're usually through it. The gas plants kick in here. Sometimes the diesel plants in the municipalities kick in for a couple of weeks to help. That's very expensive power, burning diesel fuel. But it only lasts a short period of time here. So one of the ways of calculating the price of electricity is the spread between the peak and the base load here, this being very high priced and this being a little bit lower price, average that together to come up with the price for the consumer to pay. So the wider the spread here, the higher price electricity must be, because if this goes up, we have more higher priced electricity to pay for, as well as if this cheap electricity goes down, it widens the spread here. So So let's see what's going to happen here. When the wind is blowing, the utilities buy it from me, and I'm lowering Nick's base load here. Now, in July and August, don't have much wind out there. Everything gets hot. There's no reason for wind to move, air to move, you know. In the spring, everything's warming back up. This is hot, this is cold, the air's going from here to here, you got some wind. Not so much in July and August. The spray planes come out, you know, not a lot of wind. So, the wind's not blowing. I need to irrigate my crop. I build a wind turbine to irrigate my crop with, but today the wind is not blowing, so guess what I do? I go to the grid. I get my power back. Keep in mind, you can't store that stuff. But I go to the grid to get my power back, and guess what I do here? When the wind is blowing, I'll lower the base load. The wind is not blowing, I go there with my demand. Guess what just happened? You widen the spread. Does that make electricity go up or down? There you go. This is something we kind of got to watch out for, and it's sneaky. It'll sneak up on you the way they got this thing set up. I think it's about control. You get electric cars, they run on electricity, and you're generating with a windmill. It doesn't blow all the time. You know, they got you. They got transportation, they got communication, they got lights. We don't live in teepees anymore. And we don't walk around in the winter with buffalo robes on. You know, we just turn the thermostat up. We're not set up for this anymore, but they're taking us back. We're taking us back to this. Where do I want to go from here? You've seen how that makes the price of electricity go up. I want to do a cash flow. And then we're going to get into tax credits, and then we're going to run out of time. I've done 3 hours of this. I just need a big pitcher of water, but we're going to do a cash flow next, as soon as I get this thing erased. Let's, I need some help. One of these guys.
I'll do it.
All right. You hold that thing steady, will you? There we go. Get rid of this.
Keep going.
All right. Let's build this up. Let's build us a wind farm. Let's build. Oh, hey, thank you. Why don't you push that thing over here?
Good job.
Thank you. Well, in that black bag there, weighs about 20 pounds, I got the documentation in there, and so if anybody wants to question what I do, give me about 10 minutes, I'll dig out the piece of paper that proves what I'm talking about. But in there is a newspaper article featuring Warren Buffett's Mid-American Energy, Iowa. At the time, he had 4,991 megawatts of wind energy over there for a cost of over $12 billion. So I get the calculator out, do a little calculating, and that is 2.4 million per megawatt. That's not per turbine, that's per megawatt. A megawatt is a capacity, in my opinion. If you have a 1 megawatt size generator, it'll generate 1 megawatt of electricity in an hour. Does everybody know how big a megawatt is? A megawatt is 1,000 kilowatts. And a kilowatt is 1,000 watts. A megawatt is not necessarily a very big unit of electricity. Let's just say we've got 4 250 watt light bulbs. Add that up, that's 1,000 watts. Run it for an hour, you burned a kilowatt hour. Well, it won't take you very long. You see all these lights, you see that thing, and when we get the machines going in here, you know, the kilowatt hours run up. 1,000 kilowatt hours is a megawatt. It's really not that big of a unit of electricity. in the whole scheme of things. But for $2.4 million, you can build a turbine. For $2.4 million, you can build a megawatt of generating capacity. A turbine might have 3 or 4 or 5 megawatts up there. So let's see what it costs to run this thing. And I talked to my accountant, and I said, I'm going to use 10% depreciation on this project. He said, that's conservative enough. That'll be $240,000 a year. Depreciation on that, 1/10. I'm going to use 5% for labor. That's $120,000 a year. We're going to use 5% for maintenance. That's labor, that's depreciation. We're going to use 5% for repairs and maintenance. That's another $120,000. We're going to use 1% for property taxes, and that would be $24,000. We're going to use 1% for insurance. That's about right. $24,000. We're going to rent the land from the farmer. We're going to give him $10,000 a megawatt rent. $10,000. Okay. We're going to pay some interest on this $2.4 million. We're going to pay interest at 3%. That's reasonable today, isn't it? 3%. $72,000. We got legal fees. We got attorneys. We got leases. We got lawsuits. Legal fees. We're going to put $5,000 per megawatt on there for the law. Let's see what I got. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. I'm missing one unit down here. What would that be, Doug? What am I missing? Depreciation, tax, rent, interest, legal.
How about greasing them politicians? You got anything?
Yeah, well, I do not. Lobbying expense. I omitted that. I don't know what they're paying, but I did calculate backup energy. Everybody forgets backup energy.
Yeah, energy to run this thing.
Because the wind don't blow all the time, the sun doesn't shine all the time. Backup energy must be included in here because as an irrigator, I've got several situations where I have 2 pivots on one well.
Yeah.
I can buy the right to pump 24/7, on peak, off peak, whatever. But a few years ago, that right cost me $88.50 a horsepower.
Ooh.
If I spend that much money, they said, you can pump however you want. We'll generate it for you. And so I do when I need to. Last time I did it, I think, was 2012. However, how do you calculate that? Well, it was $88.50 a horsepower. A megawatt operating at 100% efficiency could run 1,360 horsepower. So I simply took $88.50, same rate I pay as an irrigator, times 1,360 horsepower, and I got $120,000.
You're going to earmark that energy.
That's energy, okay. Backup energy. Anyway, you add that all up at $735,000 annual operating expense, excluding lobbying, vehicles, transportation, meteorological studies, raptor counts, all these other expenses I haven't even mentioned. I just picked 9 of them here. Added it up, I got $735,000. If you divide that by 8,760 hours in a year, this is $84. $84 operational expense here. Okay, now we're going to go over here. A megawatt being 1,000 kilowatts. 1 megawatt equal 1,000 kilowatts. Run this thing for an hour, and you will generate 1,000 kilowatt hours at 100% efficiency. I happen to know personally the NextEra guy. He was the project manager of the Shoals project, and he's now the NextEra state director in Nebraska. And I know him well. I got a lot of respect for the guy. In fact, a couple months ago, I made a speech at Belleville, Kansas, and got a phone call from him. So he said, "Hey, Doug, let's go out for supper. We got to talk." That's okay. We did. But when I did these calculations 2 years ago, Phil told me that the turbines were 40% efficient at the time. Okay? So that means instead of generating 1,000 kilowatt hours, you're only putting out 400 on the average. 400 kilowatt hours you have for sale every hour. I said, "Phil, what's the wholesale price of this stuff? You know, you guys are wholesalers. You don't distribute it. You don't have substations. You just generate and sell it." He says, "We have a long-term contract with Omaha Public Power for 1.5 cents per kilowatt hour." Oh, okay. So 400 units here of electricity times 0.015, that would be dollars. It's 1.5 cents. What's the answer to this? 400 times 1.5 cents in dollars?
$6.
$6. What's our operational cost per hour?
$84.
$84. What's 14 times 6? 84. You'd have to raise the price of electricity $84 just to break even with 9 of the expenses here.
You have to raise it 14 times.
I think that was what I meant to say. You'd have to raise the price of electricity 14 times to break even. Thank you. That would be like having 28 days in February and paying today's bill every other day, paying it 14 times. You want to do that?
It's monthly bill.
Paying your monthly bill every other day, you know, assuming
Every 2 days.
Every 2 days. See? Here's where we're going. Guys, these numbers, these are real numbers, and these are the numbers that I got from the NextEra guy. He said, "We have a long-term contract." I said, "What are you getting? 1.5 cents a kilowatt hour." It's higher now. And according to him, so is the tax credit. But now here comes the rest of the story. It's hard to grasp the concept of a tax credit. It's not exactly a subsidy, but it's a backdoor subsidy. A tax credit is not a check. It's not cash. There's no check, no canceled checks that show you put money in the bank. Therefore, there's no deposit slip either. So nothing hits your bank account. It's a tax credit. Taxes are a non-deductible expense. That's key. And the credit against a tax, a non-deductible expense, that's key too. Now, a tax credit to someone who does not owe any taxes is worthless. The value of a tax credit increases proportional and directly related to the magnitude of your tax bracket. Now, the guys that invest in wind turbines and any other business that involves a tax credit are the highest income guys you'll find, because they can maximize the value of both the tax credit and the depreciation on the project. Now, the price is 1.5 cents per kilowatt hour. That is a taxable number. That is the sale of electricity. That is income. The tax credit, at the time I did these calculations, was 2.3 cents per kilowatt hour. That's 153% more than the market.
It'd be exactly $600.
But wait,
It'd be about
let's
$600
say that you were in the
400
50% tax bracket
and multiply
and
it.
I gave you a $100 gift certificate. You're not going to report that as income. It's like I gave you $100 tax-free. Okay? Then you go down to Baumgart's, you're not going to buy a pipe wrench with that gift certificate, something that you could deduct. Because if you're in the 50% tax bracket, you're going to keep every deduction that you can get. You're going to go buy a pair of cowboy boots so you go to the dance the next night. Or something like that that's non-deductible. Because that $100 gift certificate being a tax-free gift, if you had to go buy those cowboy boots out of your own bank account, that means you must make $200 of net income, pay the taxes on it in order to have $100 left to buy your cowboy boots. So that gift certificate represents $200 of your net income if you're in the 50% tax bracket. If you're in the 0% tax bracket, it doesn't matter. $100 is $100. You don't owe any taxes. So if you're in a high tax bracket, you watch your transactions, you keep the tax implications in mind. This is a tax credit. It's a credit against a non-deductible expense. That gift certificate was basically a credit against a pair of cowboy boots, which is a non-deductible expense. This is income, taxable income. If we want to analyze this business, we must convert this to a taxable income value. Even though it's a sneaky thing called a tax credit, we can do that. If you're in the 50% tax bracket, in terms of net income, what is this number?
4.6.
4.6. There we go. Let's see what I got in here. There's supposed to be a calculator in here.
I thought you did all that in your head.
We're going to prove it.
Have somebody just do it on their phone.
Hey, sir, I do have a question. I do have something though. So that was like that 400 kilowatt hours a day, and and per tax, it's 1.5
That's
cents
400 kilowatt hours
a
per
day
hour.
per hour.
Yep.
So running per hour would cost you around 600.
Pennies.
Yeah,
That's $6.
that's $6.
Hey, can you run that calculator for me?
What problem do you need?
Take 4.6 and divide it by 1.5.
Okay. Okay. So 4.6.
Yep, 4.6 divided by 1.5.
1.5.
What's your number?
Up. Hold on, I screwed up.
Okay.
1.5. What? That's exactly 3.0666 going on.
That's 307%.
Yeah.
Round numbers, that's 307%. That's why you build wind turbines.
I say that all the time.
This being 153% sounds like a lot of subsidy, but when you convert that to apples, net income divided by net income is 307%. They tax money at work. The taxes that the developers do not pay are taxes that somebody else here has to pay.
And besides, Mom doesn't watch this stuff.
So it works similar to carbon pipelines, solar. It's the tax credits Yeah, it's the tax credits. Yeah, go ahead. There's other sources of income for the turbines also. The guys in California will buy renewable energy certificates per megawatt on wind farms. And if you live in California and you buy enough renewable energy certificates, you can use that to basically launder oil-fired gas plants that produce electricity and call that renewable power. Because you bought the certificates from the wind turbines that were built in the Midwest. They don't want them out there. They just want the credit. They buy the credit for renewable energy, and they can go back and fire up a coal plant, an oil plant, anything they want, and generate power out of anything they want and call it renewable energy. So that's another backdoor source of income. Let's take a quick look at a carbon pipeline. I got the numbers out of the Norfolk paper on Carbon Summit. Is that the name of the... Okay, they're going to build a $4.5 billion pipeline. It was going to carry 12 million tons of carbon dioxide. And the tax credit was $50 per ton. Okay? An investor here in the 50% tax bracket can save half of this amount in just the depreciation. This $4.5 billion will offset $4.5 billion of his net income, and it will save him in taxes, therefore, $2.25 billion. That's pretty much 50% discount just in depreciation. Now let's go over here and take a look at this tax credit. Remember, if you're in the 50% tax bracket, and we're offsetting net income with this, we probably should look at this in terms of net income, which will take it from 50 to 100. Because keep in mind, if you get a tax credit, you do not get a 1099. It's tax-free money, really. It's credit, but it's not going in your bank account, but it's just like tax-free money. So to compare apples to apples, we got to take this 12 million tons times $100. That means 1,200 million tons. I mean, $1,200 million is what that means. If you get $100 worth of value in the form of tax credit in terms of net income. And that's $1.2 billion. So 1 year later, you put, let's see here, 3.45 of this, $4.5 billion away.
Year one.
Year one. Let's run one more year. We've already taken all the depreciation out of this picture, but we're going to put another 1.2 billion of net income equivalent on our ledger. Now we got $4.65 billion in 2 years. However, we haven't deducted the $150 million operating expense it cost us for the first 2 years. That's my number. I don't know what it cost, but let's assume it cost $150 million to operate this thing for 2 years. That's 0.15 billion. So we're going to subtract our 0.15 billion, and it brings us exactly to $4.5 billion, full payoff, 2 years. Pretty good deal. We haven't received a penny of income off of this thing. I was to a carbon pipeline meeting at the commissioners meeting last week in Wayne, and the commissioners were questioning the integrity of the pipeline, and the guy assured them, this pipeline is made of high carbon steel, it's good. We use low hydrogen, high carbon rod, and we weld the seams and we x-ray it. So I have to raise my hand. So guys, the molecule, the carbon dioxide molecule that you are sequestering contains the atom that you need to have and create the pipeline to carry this stuff. Isn't there a little irony here? It just befuddled him, poor guy. He didn't know what to say. But they're taking this to alcohol plants, and the alcohol plants believe this will give them a lower carbon score, and therefore California will treat them more favorably and pay them more for their ethanol. But nobody knows more than what, for sure, I don't think. And I don't think there's any charge to hook onto this pipeline. But do you know where the charge lies? If an alcohol plant agrees to hook onto this, and you can negotiate these contracts, and if you shut down more than, in one instance that I'm familiar with, more than 8 months, say for economic reasons or something like that, maybe the price of corn's too high, maybe the price of ethanol's too low, maybe we're losing money, maybe it's best to shut down for a little while and just wait, hold this thing out till better times show up. If they shut down more than 8 months, then they have to pay for not putting CO2 in the pipeline. So we have created a situation here. We're supposed to assume that there is something wrong with CO2, but they've created an economic incentive for them to continue producing it. Another irony, isn't it? Right here. If the CO2 doesn't go in the pipeline, they don't get this. Okay? So there's going to be leases and easements, just like leases and easements on wind turbines. And these leases and easements, I know one guy that tried to negotiate the fact that the leases may be sold or the easements may be sold or conveyed in the future to another entity. That was a non-negotiable item. Here's the question. Could these wind turbine leases, or could these carbon pipeline leases, could they be sold to an entity representing 30 by 30? The definition of wind energy is very vague. If you sign that lease, you're signing the legal description that you have to the wind company, to an LLC, limited liability company. Now, I asked my NextEra friend, I said, does your company NextEra need the magnitude and the volume of tax credits that it's receiving on these turbines just to pay its taxes? And he said, no, we don't make that much money. So I said, well, how do you launder them into cash? Well, he said the words monetize, not launder. Well, that's pretty much the same thing. And the process is called tax equity financing. You probably all heard of tax increment financing. That's a property tax thing. Don't get this confused. This is a very complex process, but it's legal. It's illegal, basically a legal money laundering process. And it involves an LLC, probably owned by a corporation, and the LLC receives the assets, namely tax credits and cash from the sale of electricity and depreciation from the project, are all sort of assets. They go into the LLC, but the LLC quickly moves them over to a holding company. LLC's limited liability company means they don't have much cash, so if you sue them, they're broke. So they get their assets out of there and put them in a holding company. And then through this tax equity financing, they sell equity in the holding company to investors. High income investors are the only guys that will receive value from a tax credit. So if you invest in a holding company, buy shares of a holding company or buy stock in it, you will receive your percentage of ownership of the company. You will receive that you'll get your share of tax credits, you'll get your share of the depreciation, you'll get your share of the value of electricity, and whatever else comes into that LLC, other assets that go into the holding company, you'll get your cut of that. But you agree when you buy the stock that you will agree to a buyout, usually 5 years. It's called an equity flip. And they'll usually buy you out for about 10% on your investment. But if you do the calculation, an investor for 5 years will make in total about 88% on his investment. And that's about 16% a year, and that's pretty good. But you agree when you buy this equity in this company that they're going to buy you out for about 10%. And that's part of the return on your investment. They'll buy you out for only about 10% on your investment to get your equity back. So basically, they've taken the tax credits that they can't use, sold them to you for cash. Keep in mind, tax-free cash. And then they got your money, and then after 5 years, they get your equity. So they got now both your equity, your cash, they got their project back. Then they sell it to another company 5 years and 1 day later, because the statute of limitation on depreciation recapture expires in 5 years. So 5 years and 1 day, it's sold. Part of the business plan. Here's an example. Enel is a Rome-based corporation, Rome, Italy, has a subsidiary corporation called Tradewind. Tradewind is a Kansas City-based subsidiary corporation of Enel. Maybe 15 years or so ago, maybe not quite, I don't know, somewhere in there, Tradewind started a project around Emerson and Allen, Wakefield area, and they started buying leases, and they signed up a whole bunch of guys that got the project started. And then, I don't know, 4 or 5 years ago, they went to the Wayne Airport Authority and said, you got a non-directional navigational beacon called an NDB down here. We would like to buy that beacon from you and eliminate it. And the reason is, we're building turbines over here, and with this navigational beacon for the instrument pilots, it's restricting our proximity of building next to the airport and our height, you know. We got height restrictions to deal with in proximity to the airport. We need to build a few more turbines, we need to build them taller, and we need to build them closer, and we'll give you $500,000 to take out that NDB. An NDB is a non-directional AM navigational beacon, sends out an AM radio frequency that if you got the equipment in your airplane, you just pick that up and it'll tell you right where Wayne, Nebraska's at. You follow the needle and you go home to Wayne. If it's a poor visibility day, you know, that helps a little bit sometimes. Well, GPS made them pretty much obsolete. Most airports don't fix them if they break down. They take them out. They're junk. They're old stuff. Old World War II technology. Well, $500,000 is a pretty good number, and it kind of choked them a little bit. This is too good to be true. What are we going to do? And so, oh, let's think about this a little bit. You go home. We'll think about it. So he went home, the windmill guy, the Tradewind guy, and one guy said, well, jeepers, why don't we ask him for $1 million and tell him to come back next week? Another guy said, well, let's go to $1.5 million and let him Jew us down a little bit and see what happens. So, okay, all in favor, say aye, and they said aye. They invited him back. We'll take that thing out for $1.5 billion, not a penny less. He said, okay, sign right here. He signed the contract. And he wrote him out a check for $300,000, and I got the paperwork in that bag to prove it. He wrote him out a $300,000 down payment, says, I'll give you the $1.2 million balance about a year from now when we get this project done. But coincidentally, right after that contract was signed, Tradewind sold their project to a company called Rattlesnake Creek, and as far as I know, that's what it's known as today. Enough time had passed that they could have fully depreciated what they did have over there and harvested the tax credits that they could get, so they sold it. New company, Rattlesnake Creek. But here's the rest of the story. Guess who owns Rattlesnake Creek? The same company that owns Tradewind, Enel. Enel created the right hand, Tradewind. Tradewind sold to the left hand, Rattlesnake Creek, both owned by Enel, based in Rome, Italy. So you run all these depreciation numbers and the tax credit numbers and plus whatever other income they're getting, like in renewable energy certificates. This money is leaving the country, and it's not only leaving the country, it's leaving the country tax-free. That's what's going on here. Now, is this about control? It certainly isn't about good business. This is about snowballing the people that are sitting out here. And, you know, if you're not into business in real big magnitude, you kind of lose what a tax credit really is. But that's the trick there. It's not really income, but it works like it is. And that's just a sneaky, elusive thing about tax credits. And if anything there, I get my point across. I think I'll call it a night. I got other information I'll save for another presentation if anybody's interested. We can talk about earth science, we can talk about the solar system, we can talk about the sun, we can talk nuclear fusion, nuclear fission, generating power. Doug, go ahead.
A couple things. You might want to say, how much percentage of the air you breathe is carbon monoxide?
Anybody know what the atmosphere percentage is as far as gases?
78% nitrogen,
That's right.
like 12 on oxygen.
21%. Here we go. It's 78% nitrogen gas in our atmosphere right now. It's 21% O2 gas.
You're already at 99, you don't have much left.
It's 1% argon. I think that's AR.
Yeah.
Yeah, that up, that's 100%, but those are round percentages. Within the rounding of those percentages is less than 0.5%, less than 0.005 is CO2.
And what does every green plant need?
CO2. Now there is a group of plants, only 5% of them on Earth, that are called C4. C4 means they got 4 carbons in the molecules in the leaves that are responsible for photosynthesis. Corn is one of those crops. It's one of those plants. That means it uses only CO2 out of the atmosphere. Other plants use both CO2 and oxygen. Corn, if it gets an oxygen in there, it's got to gag it out, replace it with a CO2. It will take that carbon off of that molecule and use it for its construction purposes to build its stalk, its leaf, the kernel, the cob, the roots. The carbon in that plant comes off of the CO2 molecule and it releases the oxygen to us. So
what is an ethanol plant? Net zero basically, because of the renewable corn that they're using. Now, I hate to say that because somebody said ethanol plants maybe are a little bit.
Natural gas notwithstanding, an ethanol plant is net zero. They burn natural gas and, of course, electricity. Set that aside. The only CO2 besides that goes out their stack, and it is a byproduct of the fermentation process, is the exact same CO2 that corn plant took out of the atmosphere in the first place. The kernel of corn. It took that CO2 right out of the atmosphere, and we'd take it over here, add a little yeast to it, grind it up, pour a little water on it, and a little yeast and some other secret ingredients, and they cook that stuff up, warm it up, and it ferments, and CO2 comes off. But it's a little bit like you make good champagne. You take some nice fine grapes, and you smash them up, and a little sugar, a little yeast, and you cork it down, and you save that CO2 because it makes little bubbles. And CO2 in beer. What's a flat beer? That's no good. How about a flat Pepsi? CO2 will kill you, though. It's bad stuff, you know what I mean? CO2 is essential. And we got energy. Energy comes from the sun. And energy cannot be created or destroyed. You can only change its form. And every action you have an equal and opposite reaction. So all the energy here on Earth originally comes from the sun in the form of light. Light is absorbed, becomes heat. With heat, light, water, mineral in the soil, you can have a plant. And with a plant, you can feed a steer. Feed him some corn. With a steer, you can make some hamburger. So we eat the hamburger. And, of course, our metabolic process is like a bonfire. It's an oxidation process of that hamburger. And the byproduct of that is our energy. And of course, we inhale oxygen, or you could not have a bonfire. You can snuff a candle out if you take away the oxygen. So we inhale oxygen to keep our little bonfire going, burning up that hamburger so we can go out and chop down a cottonwood tree if we want to. But we exhale the carbon dioxide because too much CO2 will put our fire out too. So we exhale the CO2, we inhale the oxygen, the CO2 goes right back over here, raises another corn plant. So we can get another ear of corn, so we can have another steer, so we can have another hamburger, and it just keeps right on going. If you compromise our CO2 cycle, you will compromise our food supply. And not only that, you'll compromise our oxygen supply. And oxygen is very important. It's like sex. It becomes very important if you're not getting any.
Got one other comment. You might comment on what you said about a project that's going forth, that they said what revenue would they generate in 1 year and how they might be able to grab land with that money. A wind project.
A wind project.
50 million in 1 year.
Oh yeah, okay. My next era man was talking to me about the Shoals 2 project, which is supposed to go through southern Cedar County and northern Wayne County. And with the price of electricity today, and it has gone up since I did my calculations, and the tax credits today, which according to him have gone up as well, those guys were calculating about a $50 million profit, he said, in the Shoals 2 project. And he was really hoping I would see his way of thinking here and maybe not be standing up here in front of a chalkboard. $50 million a year on the Shoals 2 project was what he had calculated the profit would be. Well, These guys adopted a mile setback upon the recommendation of the Cedar County Zoning Board. I wrote up a set of recommendations for those guys, and I recommended a 2-mile setback. And not only that, written permission from anybody that could even see one within, it's maybe a little bit overdone, but I got my point across, I think, but they went back down to a mile. But let's say now, if I was NextEra or any wind company or anybody wanting to do business in Cedar County, now I know what I'm up against. I got a set of regulations to work with. If I comply with this, and this, and those guys voted them in, this, and this, I can locate in Cedar County. So I look at the map. This area, there's too many acreages over here, too many residential residences. A little sparser over here. Not too bad at all over here. We could start over here, and maybe we don't have to worry about our mile setback, but over here, if we bought this guy out, and a couple guys over here, we could bring them turbines way over here. Then we could get a couple more over here, we could come around. You see what I mean? For $50 million, how many acreages could you buy? You wouldn't have to buy the acreage, you just have to buy the address and say, well, they give you $250,000, you move to town for 2 years. You can move back out here if you want to. Just let us get our wind project out. If I was a wind company, I'd be thinking about that. I don't want to give them ideas, I suppose I already have, but I don't know why they wouldn't have thought of it anyway, but whether it can happen, I don't know, but it's something that if I was them, I'd be considering, and if you want to play ball with these guys, you kind of got to get down in the weeds and think like them too if you're on their side of the table. So that's the problem. When you come up with a set of regulations, their problems there are limited to how do I make the regulations work for me. And if they come a solution for that, and you don't want them, yeah, it's pretty hard to back out then. So, any more questions?
8-10 years ago, I heard that you were thinking about putting smaller, more efficient windmills closer to population centers. These big windmill farms out here were obsolete. So, because of line loss, by the time that electricity got to these population centers, we lost how much electricity. So, how did this get to be cool again? How did this get to be a big deal out here in the rural areas?
It isn't about generating electricity. It's about harvesting the tax credits, the depreciation, and the other little intrinsic things that are involved with that. That $6 an hour, that's piddly compared to the rest of the story. Electrically speaking, they're not efficient at all. First they got to generate the power, but you got dozens and dozens of turbines out there, and this one's catching the first wind, so he's going around like that, and over here this guy, he's catching some vortices off of that one, and he's going a little faster sometimes, and maybe he's going a little slower. They generate AC power, all right. AC power looks like this on a graph. You got a wave here. Three-phase power is 3 of these waves 120 degrees apart from each other so they don't get tangled up. If you can see that over all this, you see right here how nice and pretty 3-phase power is. You got these sine waves 320 degrees apart from each other so they don't get tangled up with each other and break the breakers. That'll create 360 degrees of magnetism around a rotor of a 3-phase motor. Beautiful power, nice and efficient. It's magnetic. It makes that thing turn. You keep a set of good bearings in there, it's going to run and run and run and run. The problem is each turbine doesn't throw off the same sine wave. To make this work, your wavelength your wave angle and the frequency of these waves has to be absolutely perfect, or we'll throw out the breakers. Then all our lights will go out until they figure out what's going on. So the turbines cannot just throw their power on the grid. They'll crash it. So they take this AC power and convert it to DC power, which is a straight line, direct current, kind of like the alternator in your pickup. It generates AC, but it converts it to 12 volts DC. Charge your battery. Then you can buy an inverter and put it on your pickup, and you can invert DC power into a modified sine wave. And it comes out, looks like this. Kind of a block wave. This is kind of an exaggeration, but if you stand back far enough, you can see the implication of a wave there, if you cut enough corners off. Well, they can make that match this good enough. It'll run the lights good, and you can run that through an electric motor, but the electric motor don't like it. You got a vibration. Because when he wants this nice smooth wave and he's got to jag around the corner, you get a little high-pitched vibration. The motor runs hotter. It takes more of this to develop the same power. And so you go down to the hardware store and you buy an energy-efficient refrigerator that says $150 tax credit on the side. And you take it home and you plug it in to this stuff. And it runs hotter, has a little more vibration, and a few years later you haul it to the landfill and pay a fee and go back down and get another $150 tax credit. And so somebody hasn't thought this through too far if they're thinking about electricity. Another thing is they say, well, let's charge a battery. Let's store this wind energy. Well, it really sounds like a good idea, but how big a battery you need to put a megawatt electricity in there? What's it going to cost? $1 million? $12 million? $120,000? I don't know what they cost, but it's a lot of money. And a megawatt today, the wholesale price of a megawatt is around $20. So let's say you got $1 million battery here. How many times are you going to have to discharge that? So here's the next deal. To charge a battery, a wind turbine generates AC power, converts it to DC. And maybe you could get into this spot right here now and charge your battery. But when you charge a battery, your battery charger gets hot, don't it? Your battery even gets hot. Heat is wasted energy. When you discharge a battery, your battery gets hot. Heat is wasted energy. So you're wasting energy charging the battery, you're wasting energy discharging the battery. And the cycles that you'd have to cycle that battery at $20 a megawatt wholesale price, I don't think you could cycle that thing, ever break even for the cost of the batteries. It's just a dream.
Doug, do you want to go the other way? Instead of smaller wind turbines, talk about the biggest one or the bigger one?
I read an article, Virginia University had a turbine 500 meters tall, and a meter is about 39 inches. That sucker is about 1,600 feet tall. It had helicopter blades on it running like this, not like this. And when the wind wasn't blowing, the electricity from the grid kept it going so the blades wouldn't sag too much and get tangled up with the cables that are supporting this thing. So if you put this in the very center of a quarter section of land at 1,600 feet, if you do the calculations at a 45-degree angle down, you'd have to run your first cables out into the corners to get to the top of that tower here. And then you'd have to run shorter cables all the way like that. And if you do not have height restrictions on your turbines in your county, something like that could occur. You build a great big tall sucker right in the middle, cables all the way down everywhere, and that farm's pasture at best. So, but anyway, I found that on the computer. Virginia Tech had something like that. So, anything else?
Amazing, Doug.
Thank you, Nick. Don't forget to pick up your Range magazine. And not only that, that coupon, it's going to make my wife look good because I didn't have enough guts to call CJ. I talked my wife into it. Thank you, everybody.
Hey, I see some new faces here tonight. This is not our regularly scheduled meeting. This was a special windmill meeting. Regular scheduled meetings are third Tuesday of every month, 7 p.m. at the Liberty Garage. Thank you all for coming.